time. And then earlier this year, the pressure of being added to our top 10 list led fugitive Robert Van Wees to turn himself in to FBI agents in Texas for the 1983 murder of a young woman's daughter. For 33 years, that little girl, now all grown up, had hoped and prayed for his arrest, and he was finally captured on her birthday. Now, cold comfort, I suspect, but we hope that his capture provides some measure of peace and justice to her. The work that we do is not easy, to put it mildly, but the FBI is mission-focused and passionate about the work we do. We are determined to be the very best at protecting the American people and upholding the rule of law, and I, for one, could not be more proud to be part of it. I want to thank you, this committee, for your support. We could not do what we do without the funding that you.
Wondershare Filmora is a user-friendly editing software which contains hundreds of special effects for video that allows you to easily create a unique visual effect. It allows you to import video from a variety of devices such as SLR, camera, tablet, cell phone, or directly download from the website. It also supports all key standard and HD videos including MP4, AVI, MOV, etc. First, drag the media files into the timeline, including videos, music, or photos. Then you can edit video using powerful editing functions such as trim, adjustment, rotate, crop, and so on. You can also separate audio from the video to adjust the volume or trim it, as well as adding your voice directly to the software through the microphone. Through nearly 300 kinds of elements, your video can become more abundant. Filters can enrich the color of the entire screen. Overlays can make the video presence a unique visual effect. Transitions can make the connection between the videos and the video becomes more smooth and natural. Split screen can display more than one video simultaneously in the same picture. And with green screen, you can easily create special effects like they do in Hollywood. Mosaic can obscure any part that you don't want to show. In addition, there are lots of text templates, built-in sound, and free copyright background music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs for memorable gifts, or upload to social media to share your music for you to choose. After you finish editing, you can export videos to the computer or other mobile devices, burn to DVDs.
24 top secret emails with 3 State Department officials. The classification top secret means, in part, the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. Secret means, in part, the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. William Burns, that threatened grave damage to the national security.
Well, as I said, Mr. Chairman, the handling of the investigation and whether or not, in particular, whether or not decisions made in that investigation were the product of any improper considerations is precisely what the outside independent Inspector General is investigating. And when we get his findings, I will look and see what appropriate action we can take at the FBI in response to that.
Can anyone on this committee set up a private server now and conduct classified business on it, since not a single person has been prosecuted or held accountable for the Clinton email investigation?
No.
Thank you. Director Wray, what are you doing to ensure that the top ranks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation are cleared of individuals who are tainted by bias or those who have exhibited indiscretion by failing to demonstrate the integrity Americans expect from their top law enforcement officials?
Well, the first thing I'm doing is respecting the outside independent investigations that are underway. My preference is to be one of these people who is not a act first and ask questions later kind of guy, but an ask questions first and then act kind of guy. And so I think these matters are being looked at, as they should be, by somebody outside the FBI. And when those findings come to me, I will take appropriate action if necessary. In the meantime, I am emphasizing in every audience I can inside the Bureau that our decisions need to be made based on nothing other than the facts and the law and our rules and our processes and our core values, and not based on any political consideration. Database is querying of information that is already lawfully and constitutionally in the FBI's possession and is most useful at the earliest stages when information is coming in fragments and the Bureau is trying to make assessments of what do we have, is this a real threat, where is this going? And I would implore the committee and the Congress not to begin rebuilding the wall that existed before 9/11.
Well, thank you. My time's expired, but I will add that we share that concern as well, and that's why we have drawn a clear distinction between national security and solving domestic crimes. And when it comes to the query, we allow that to move forward. But when you then find that there's something related to the investigation of a domestic crime, then you should go ahead and get a search warrant. And we've protected the FBI's ability to access that database for the purpose of a query. But then if you're going to take it further and actually read the contents of the emails, if they're national security, go right ahead, because you may be stopping a terrorist attack. But if you're solving a domestic crime, whatever it might be, then I think you need to respect the civil liberties of American citizens and get a warrant. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his questions.
Thank you. Let me say prior to my statement that I totally agree with the chairman in his observations on 702 and on the distinctions we made in our bill between national security and counterintelligence operations on the one hand and investigations of domestic crimes on the other, where you should get a warrant, where you'd normally need a warrant. Director Wray, I'd like to ask you for your help putting the events of the last few days into context. To set the stage, over the summer, in an interview with the New York Times, President Trump stated, quote, "When Nixon came along, out of courtesy, the FBI started reporting to the Department of Justice. But the FBI person really reports directly to the President of the United States," close quote. Director Wray, you have one direct report to the executive branch. To whom do you directly report?
I directly report to the Deputy Attorney General, who then reports to the Attorney General.
Thank you. Has President Trump ever asked you to sidestep the chain of command and report directly to him?
No.
Also, over the summer, former Director Comey testified that during a private dinner, President Trump told him, quote, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty." Has President Trump ever asked you for loyalty?
I have never been asked by the President to take any kind of loyalty oath. My loyalty is to the Constitution, to the laws of this country, and to the good men and people of America.
Thank you. Last week, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to one felony count of lying to the FBI about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. I would like to put President Trump's initial Twitter reaction up on the screen. I won't read it, but I will simply say he claims here to have known that General Flynn committed a crime at the time General Flynn was fired. There's some controversy as to whether the President actually wrote this tweet. The White House later claimed that it came from the President's private attorney. But I'm not sure that it matters who wrote it, given the Department of Justice's litigating position that these tweets are, quote, "official statements of the President of the United States," close quote. A few clarifying questions, Mr. Director. In your experience at the Department of Justice, have you ever prosecuted a case involving a charge of obstruction of justice?
Yes.
And sections 1503, 1505, and 1512 of Title 18 make it a crime if someone corruptly, quote, "obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding," close quote. What does it mean to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding?
Congressman, that would require me to get into kind of a legal discussion. And it's been a while since I've looked at the case law on the subject. I do have somebody who's been both a line prosecutor and a senior Justice Department official and a defense attorney, that sometimes the language of that statute can be tricky.
Has knowledge of a crime and he attempts to wave off criminal investigators, does that constitute obstruction of justice?
Well, certainly the defendant's knowledge and state of mind and intent is a critical element of the offense.
Okay. Later that day, the President tweeted this claim that we'll put up there, and in effect, he accuses former Director Comey of giving false testimony. Mr. Comey testified that President Trump urged him to be lenient with Michael Flynn, producing a note in which he quoted the President saying, I hope you can let this go. In multiple appearances before Congress, Attorney General Sessions appears to have corroborated both the fact of the meeting and the gist of the conversation between the President and Director Comey. Director Wray, do you have any reason to doubt the testimony of Director Comey or Attorney General Sessions on this point?
Congressman, the questions you're asking go directly to what Special Counsel Mueller is investigating. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to be weighing in on that in this setting.
You don't think you can say whether you have reason to doubt the veracity of a statement because that might be under investigation?
Congressman, the question you're asking me, and I appreciate the reasons for the question, but the questions you're asking me would be asking me to weigh in on witnesses in the course of an investigation that's ongoing, and I don't think that's appropriate for me to do.
Fair enough. At your confirmation hearing, you testified that you would, quote, consider any effort to tamper with Director Mueller's investigation unacceptable and inappropriate. That any such effort would need to be dealt with very sternly and appropriately indeed. Since your confirmation, has the President ever contacted you about the Special Counsel's investigation? Has the Attorney General or anybody else at the White House?
No.
Okay, my final question is, the President's tirade ended with one final tweet where he says your reputation is in tatters. After years of, well, Director Wray, and it's up there. We have heard other veterans of the FBI and the Department of Justice push back against this attack on the reputation of the FBI. With the time I have, we haven't heard from you. With the time I have left, will you respond to this tweet by the President? Is the FBI's reputation in tatters?
Mr. Chairman, may I have time to answer this question because it's something that matters to me.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Congressman, there is no shortage of opinions out there. What I can tell you is that the FBI that I see is tens of thousands of agents and analysts and staff working their tails off to keep Americans safe from the next terrorist attack, gang violence, child predators, spies from Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. The FBI that I see is tens of thousands of brave men and women who are working as hard as they can to keep people that they will never know safe from harm. And the FBI that I see is reflected in folks like the new class of agents that I swore in at Quantico 2 days ago, hard-charging, high-integrity people, people like the hostage rescue team and SWAT teams that we send out into all sorts of danger with almost no notice. The FBI that I see is people, decent people, committed to the highest principles of integrity and professionalism and respect. The FBI that I see is respected and appreciated by our partners in federal, state, and local law enforcement, in the intelligence community, by our foreign counterparts, both law enforcement and national security, in something like 200 countries around the globe. That's the FBI that I see. Now, do we make mistakes? You bet we make mistakes, just like everybody who's human makes mistakes. And when we make mistakes, there are independent processes like that of the outside independent Inspector General that will drive and dive deep into the facts surrounding those mistakes. And when that independent fact-finding is complete, we will hold our folks accountable if that's appropriate.
It's very fine. Thank you very much. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, you've mentioned that the IG, the Inspector General, is investigating matters related, for example, to the Clinton email server scandal, et cetera. But isn't it a fact that the IG does not have prosecutorial powers?
Well, under certain circumstances, the Inspector General works with prosecutors to bring criminal cases.
What about in this case?
Well, this is a matter that's under review at the moment, looking into the facts surrounding all those decisions.
So the bottom line is the IG is looking into the matter, investigating it, but has no prosecutorial powers per se at this time.
The Inspector General does not himself have prosecutorial power, yes.
Thank you. The President of the United States, as the chairman mentioned, recently expressed the opinion that the FBI's reputation was, quote, in tatters, unquote. Now, as someone who sat on this committee, the Judiciary Committee that has oversight of the Justice Department and the FBI for over 20 years now, such a statement is, at least at first, shocking. But when you look at a few facts, it's understandable why the President might make such a statement. A former head of the FBI, Robert Mueller, is put in charge of an important investigation. And who does he pick to be on his team? Well, you'd want people who are experienced and smart and, most importantly, unbiased. Because whatever you do, the result is going to be second-guessed. One side or the other is going to be dissatisfied, critical. So above all things, they've got to at least appear to be fair and unbiased. So who does Mueller pick? He picked 16 attorneys. 9 of the 16, more than half, have given money to the Obama campaign or the Clinton campaign or both. And nobody has given a cent to Donald Trump or his campaign. Does that show a lack of bias? Does that show fairness? I think the American people can decide that for themselves. And perhaps even more shocking, we recently learned that one of those supposedly unbiased investigators on the Mueller team was a guy named Peter Strzok. Turns out Strzok was sending out anti-Trump, pro-Clinton messages So he ultimately got canned from the investigation. The question is, how did this guy get on Mueller's supposedly unbiased team in the first place, when you consider that this is the same guy that had a key position investigating the Hillary Clinton email server scandal and apparently had a hand in altering the FBI's conclusion that Clinton was grossly negligent down to extremely careless so she could escape prosecution and thus stay in the race against Donald Trump. And now we learn that the number 2 guy on Mueller's team, Andrew Wiseman, is just as biased as Strzok. He made an anti-Trump communication to the since-fired Sally Yates, and the depths of this anti-Trump bias on the Mueller team, it just goes on and on. It's absolutely shocking. Director Wray, I know all this took place before you took the helm at the FBI, but none other than the President of the United States has said that an organization that most Americans, including myself, hold in the highest esteem, the FBI, is in tatters. What can you do, what will you do to restore confidence in the premier law enforcement agency in the world?
Congressman, I appreciate the question and the reason for the question. It goes to the heart of whether or not the Bureau is following its processes and the rules and the guidelines and adhering to the independence and objectivity and professionalism that we all come to expect and respect from the FBI. And I think the best way that I can validate the trust of the American people in the FBI is to ensure that we bring that same level of professionalism and integrity and objectivity and adherence to process in everything we do. As I said at the beginning, I think it is important that we not jump first and ask questions later. So the second thing that I think can be done is when there are fair questions to be asked about things like whether or not some of the decisions made in the 2016 investigation were handled appropriately or were subject or based on any kind of improper considerations, rather than have the FBI investigate itself, having an outside inspector general do the investigation and report to all of us on the findings, I think is one of the best things I can do. And then based on that information, I won't hesitate to take appropriate action based on what it is he finds.
Thank you, and I'm almost out of time, but let me ask you, would you as FBI director, for example, ever permit associates of someone under investigation who themselves could also be under investigation to sit in an interview with the accused?
Well, I will say this. Having been, as I said to Congressman Nadler, both a line prosecutor and a Justice Department official, but then also a defense attorney, that's not my experience as the normal practice. I'm also, however, reluctant to ever answer questions, as you can appreciate, with a hypothetical about whether I would ever do something, because every investigation is subject to its own unique circumstances.
I certainly understand it, because that's exactly what happened in the so-called investigation of Hillary Clinton, and I yield back my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Director, for being here today, and thanks to you for your leadership of this agency and to the men and women who work so hard to protect our country and to serve the United States. We all appreciate it, even though we might have a few questions. My first question, has to do with cybersecurity. You know, there's a rapidly growing threat of cyber attacks at all levels, federal, state, and local, business, personal level. And I was really concerned to learn in November of a report highlighting the FBI's failure to notify multiple government officials that they were the target of a Russian hacking campaign. Now, at least according to this report, 500 people were targeted in the past year, including officials as high profile as the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the former head of the Air Force Intelligence. Many of these people still had security clearances or worked for the government. So I'd like to know, the FBI was, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, of these efforts for at least a year, but I am advised and informed only 2 of the targets. Can you explain why these individuals had to learn from the Associated Press that they were targets of an aggressive Russian hacking effort? And do we know if any classified information was stolen? Were any members of Congress or congressional staff a target? And what mechanisms or additional resources need to be put in place so that targeted officials know they're at risk when there's a foreign operation such as this?
Well, Congresswoman, I think I'm not comfortable trying to discuss this specific victim engagements in a particular investigation, at least in this setting. But I think what I can tell you, which might be helpful in response, is that we have very well-established criteria and policies and procedures for questions of victim notification in cyber matters. And the questions, and I probably can't repeat them to you verbatim, but I can give you the gist of them. The questions go to things like, number one, can we identify the victim, which in a lot of cases is harder than you might think. Number two, actually protect somebody, prevent a loss, et cetera. We also look at whether or not sharing the information at the time that we in question would potentially compromise or jeopardize an existing investigation or reveal sources and methods, which is often the case in these kinds of investigations. And the last point I guess I would make is that when you have a large number of people, it's much easier for us to provide victim notification when we have official or government or corporate accounts where we can contact the Chief Information Security Officer and then they can communicate to all the people who are on that server. When you talk about Gmail accounts and things like that, it gets a lot harder because a lot of people's Gmail addresses don't have, Ray, C-W-R-A-Y, or,
Right, but for example, and I assume if what you're describing is the current practice, when the Democratic National Committee was hacked by the Russians, the FBI contacted an intern. They never contacted the chairman of the DNC. She found out, months later. So hopefully those types of procedures have been revised. Do you know that?
I think the procedures themselves remain the same, and the procedures themselves, I think, are pretty sound. The question of, but if you think about what they are questions that the investigators have to ask in each victim notification context.
Let me go, when we had the Attorney General here recently, we asked, there's an ongoing effort to hack into the election system. We know that from various reports. And the Attorney General said really nothing was going on, that he hadn't been able to pay. I'm paraphrasing. He would say it's really important, we haven't spent enough time on it. I'm getting the sense that that's true across the government. In fact, we've got systems that were hacked within a half an hour at DEFCON by state voting systems. What is the FBI doing relative to preserving the integrity of the voting structure itself for the next election?
Mr. Chairman, may I see my time? May I answer that one?
Yes,
thank you. Well, I think the FBI is actually very focused on this subject. It's one of the things that I've tried to insist on upon arriving. We have a foreign influence task force that we stood up that brings together both our counterintelligence division, our cyber division, and our criminal division, as well as some other parts of the Bureau. We are in coordination through that task force with DHS, which of course has responsibility for a lot of the election infrastructure, along with states. We are in contact with our foreign partners because, as you know, efforts to interfere with elections are occurring in other countries as well. And so that by doing that with our close relationships with our foreign counterparts, we learn more about tradecraft methods and things like that. So we're acutely focused on looking out for signs of interference in the 2018 or 2020 election cycle.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I know my time is up, but I hope that there is an effort by the Bureau to communicate with state election officers who oftentimes have been kept in the dark, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, a couple of questions. One is one that I'm sure you're aware of, and I'm just going to ask it as a do you agree, and it's not hypothetical, but it's non-specific. Do you agree that persons should not have their assets forfeited without due process and a provable link to criminal activity?
Well, Congressman, it's been a while since I looked at the law on asset forfeiture, so I want to be careful not to...
This is a constitutional, not a statutory.
Well, I believe that in the context of asset forfeiture, we should respect the Constitution.
Okay, so it's fair to say that if somebody has $10,000 in their van, they have it taken from them, and they have to sue to get it back even though they're never charged with a crime, that would be wrong under due process in the Constitution.
Well, again, I'm not trying to make this difficult, but to me, asset forfeiture questions raise all kinds of complicated case law questions about due process, et cetera. But I do believe due process and adherence to the Constitution are incredibly important in the asset forfeiture context as in elsewhere.
Thank you, Director. Now, switching to the matter of Peter Strzok, and I had a long time working with your folks on the personnel side over at Oversight, where we oversee a lot of those things. And I just want to make the record straight now that you're, in addition to being the chief from a law enforcement standpoint, you're also sort of the ultimate head of HR for those tens of thousands of people who are working so hard for us. Is an FBI agent allowed to have a political opinion?
Yes.
Is an FBI agent allowed to communicate that political opinion to their wife or even their mistress?
Yes.
So nothing in a text simply communicating a political opinion would be cause for firing or any other action under the ordinary rules of the FBI or any federal person, correct?
I think each question would have to be based on its own circumstances. Certainly, I can imagine situations, as you're describing, where it wouldn't be, and I can imagine situations where it might be.
Well, so that brings us to a situation now in which an individual is key to the question of whether or not there should be a full de novo review of the FBI's actions as to Hillary Clinton and the decision not to prosecute her, since he was actively involved in that. So my question to you is, since it's clear that whatever Peter Strzok did was sufficient to have him relieved, something that in the ordinary course of simply communicating a political opinion would not cause that and would be inappropriate to relieve somebody simply for having a political opinion, will you make available to this committee, upon the chairman's obvious request, the ability to see any or all of those 10,000 texts sufficient to understand why this individual was dismissed and how it might be relevant to the question of the objectivity of Director Comey's investigation and conclusions?
Well, there's a couple parts to your question, if I might. First, I want to be clear that the individual in question has not been dismissed or
he's not been
what happened was,
but he's been relieved from the duties he had, and he's now in HR, which
he was reassigned away from the special counsel investigation, which is different than disciplinary action. Second, as to the question of access to the text messages, we'd be happy to try to work with the committee on that. I want to be sensitive to the fact that there is an active, very active, outside independent investigation by the Inspector General, and the last thing I want to do, and I think the last thing this committee would want to do, would somehow compromise or interfere with that. So we'll have to go through a process to assess how we can be sensitive to those operational considerations, while at the same time, as we should be responsive to Congress and this committee and its oversight responsibility.
Would the gentleman yield on that?
Of course I'd yield to Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. We have been in communication with the Inspector General. We very much respect the investigation that is taking place there. And we have asked the Department of Justice, and through them, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for all of the 1.2 million documents that have been provided to the Inspector General, minus those that relate to any particular ongoing grand jury investigation. Now, I have received back from the Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Boyd, a letter indicating that they will make a fulsome response to that request. So I would like, in following up with Mr. Ice's question, to hear you tell us that you will also provide us with that honoring of that fulsome request, because most of those documents that the department has committed to provide are coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Certainly, I don't mean to suggest that we wouldn't be fully responsive and cooperative with the committee. I'm simply saying that we would work with the Justice Department in making sure that we have considered all the appropriate factors that we need to make sure that we're not doing something on the in terms of unintended consequences with ongoing investigations, but we have no desire to frustrate the very legitimate oversight requests of this committee.
Would the chairman yield for a moment?
Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. I just want to ask the director if can this kind or does this kind of document request of the Inspector General on an ongoing investigation, could it interfere with that investigation? Is it proper to respond fulsomely? I mean, what are the limitations here?
Well, I think a lot of that requires, as the chairman referenced, us to make sure that we are touching base with the Inspector General, since it's his investigation and not ours. If the Inspector General is comfortable with the information being provided and that it's not going to interfere with or impede his investigation, then that's one very, very significant consideration that can be put to the side. So I can commit that our staff will work with the Justice Department staff and your staff to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to be responsive, while at the same time making sure that we're not in some way jeopardizing or compromising an ongoing investigation or revealing something about a grand jury matter or anything like that.
We asked for it minus grand jury material. Obviously, it takes some time to do that. Mr. Boyd committed to a date of January 15, and he's going to require your cooperation. So we want to have your assurance that that cooperation in meeting that date will be forthcoming. We intend to follow up with further letters on clarifying this, but it's very important that we have this information very quickly. The Inspector General is completely cooperative with us in his investigation, but they're not his documents. They are the FBI and the Department of Justice documents, so the request is not directed at him, it's directed to the department, and we need to have full response.
We intend to be fully cooperative with both this committee and the Inspector General.
I robbed the gentleman from California of a bit of his time, so I'm going to...
I have to say I yield back.
I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman.
I yield it to you, but the gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you. Director, at this time, as far as you know, you're not asserting or believe there's any privilege as to those documents. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't reviewed the however many million documents that...
I'm only saying that you, at this time, you know of no privilege.
I'm not aware of it, but I really haven't asked the question yet, to be honest.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then lastly, since in the case of Peter Strzok and other statements, because this information was not made available to us at a time in which your predecessor, Mr. Comey, specifically said he was breaking precedent and being open and transparent as to the investigation of Hillary Clinton's taking from government possession documents under the Federal Records Act and classified documents. Do you agree that a de novo review at some point by someone is clearly warranted as to whether or not the decision not to prosecute was appropriate?
Well, Congressman, I think what I would say to that is there is what I would consider a de novo outside independent review by the Inspector General into whether or not decisions made, including charging or not charging decisions in the matter that you're referring to, were based on any kind of improper considerations or political considerations. And depending on what the Inspector General finds, there could be any range of possible steps that we or others would have to take in response to those findings.
So it's not a de novo review by the Inspector General, but a review of whether or not impropriety occurred, and as such, a de novo review of that decision not to prosecute Hillary Clinton would be the question.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
I think
Director may answer the question.
Yeah, I think I can briefly respond, which is, I think of the Inspector General's investigation as de novo in one sense, which is that it's objective, arm's length, no skin in the game, if you will, But you're right that the Inspector General is not second-guessing prosecutorial decisions and things like that. However, the Inspector General is looking at the very important question of whether or not improper political considerations factored into the decision-making. If he were to conclude that that's what happened, then I think at that point we're in a situation where we have to assess what else might need to be done to unring that bell, if you will.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I welcome you, Director, and I thank you for your service. I'm holding in my hand right now the mission of the FBI, which reads, the mission of the FBI is to protect and defend the United States against terrorists and foreign intelligence threats, to uphold and enforce the criminal laws of the United States, and to provide leadership and criminal justice services to federal, state, municipal, and international agencies and partners, and to perform these responsibilities in a manner that is responsive to the needs of the public and is faithful to the Constitution of the United States. Do you adhere to that mission?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that mission include your responding to the political bias and comments of politicians?
I do not think it is part of my responsibility to respond to opinions and biases, if they are out there by politicians.
And forgive me for the time period that I have. If Director Comey made a statement that there would be no prosecution against the former Secretary of State, would that statement have been reviewed by the Department of Justice?
Well, Congresswoman, I think that that whole decision-making was handled is part of what the Inspector General is looking at.
Is that the protocol? You indicated that you report to the Deputy Attorney General, he reports to the Attorney General. And so in the normal protocol, a statement that you would have made or any other FBI director would have made, Director Mueller, when he was the FBI director, reviewed by that protocol? Is that the likely protocol?
The likely protocol, sure.
Let me move on to indicate that it was stated earlier that the FBI, that the former secretary disclosed top secrets into emails, whether that, and asked the question whether that should be investigated. The present president disclosed top secret classified information to Russian ambassador and foreign minister in the Oval Office. Is the FBI investigating those disclosures?
Congresswoman, I wouldn't confirm or suggest the existence of any ongoing investigation.
Just a few years ago, this committee considered and eventually moved on a obstruction of justice element in an impeachment proceeding. Do you believe, yes or no, can a sitting president commit obstruction of justice?
Congresswoman, legal questions, especially legal questions regarding impeachment, are not something that I'm equipped to answer in this setting as an FBI director.
This is separate and apart from impeachment. Do you believe that a sitting president can commit an obstruction of justice?
That also is a legal question, and I would defer to the lawyers on that one. I'm a now reformed lawyer as an FBI
I understand.
director.
Is it your opinion that if a sitting president commits a crime, then it becomes a non-crime?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
If a sitting president commits a crime, does it become a non-crime?
Same answer.
Let me move on to the idea of the quote from the President of the United States. And do you believe that the FBI's reputation is in tatters? What impact did that have on the FBI? And if you would move quickly, I know you gave a long assessment, but what impact would that have on the FBI if that is a statement made nationally and also to the world, that the FBI is in tatters?
Congresswoman, the agents, analysts, and staff of the FBI are big boys and girls. We understand that we will take criticism from all corners, and we're accustomed to that. I believe, personally, based on what I've seen, that our reputation with our counterparts in law enforcement, federal, state, and local, our counterparts in the intelligence community, our counterparts around the world, the communities that we serve, the victims that we protect, the judges we appear before, the scientists we interact with in the laboratory services space, for example.
I have another
My experience has been that our reputation is quite good.
Thank you very much. I want to be assured to the American people that Andrew Weissman and Peter Strzok, who were removed from their posts, that will not sabotage Bob Mueller's investigation to Trump campaign's collusion with Russia. Their removal.
I'm sorry,
that their removal, Peter Strzok and Mr. Weissman, will not sabotage Mueller's investigation into Russian collusion, their removal from the investigation?
I'm not aware of any effort by anyone to sabotage or less even Special Counsel Mueller's investigation.
Let me ask the question on the black identity extremists. You indicated, or we have had some conversations. Let me indicate to you that a report that was done August 14, 2017, said that during the same period of this report, they found that right-wing extremists were behind nearly twice as many incidents, 115, and just over a third of these incidents were foiled than those who might be considered Islamists or might be considered others. There is a black extremist identity report. Again, I asked the question, would you see that report be clarified, and would you take note of the fact that the convictions dealing with violence are more for looking for my chart, are more dealing with Islamists and left wing and less for right wing? So right wing extremists are not being prosecuted. Black identity extremists, as declared by the FBI, are in fact subjected to a report, and if I might say, a FBI that is not diverse, that I know that we would like to work on to make it diverse, but they are not being prosecuted the way right wing. Right wing has the lowest amount of prosecutions in the United States. Percent of domestic terror incidents involving federal prosecution, the right wing is the lowest. The left wing is prosecuted 100%. Can you explain that?
The time of the gentlewoman has expired. The director is permitted to answer the question.
Well, Congresswoman, I'd have to look at the statistics that you saw. I can tell you that we have in our domestic terrorism program, that last time I looked, we have about 50% more white supremacist, what the category that we would call white supremacist investigations than we do in the black identity extremist category. The other point I would make is that in all of these contexts, in the domestic terrorism arena, that we only investigate if there are three things. One, federal criminal activity, credible evidence of a federal crime. Two, credible information suggesting an attempt to use force or violence. And three, those things in furtherance of a political or social goal. If we don't have that, we don't investigate. It doesn't matter whether right wing, left wing, or any other wing.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like a report back on that question, please. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, for your testimony here today and your service to our country. Number of curiosities I come here with this morning, as all of us do, and one of them is that in the FBI interview and investigation of General Flynn, are there notes from those interviews? Do you know?
Number one, I don't know, but beyond that, I wouldn't want to comment on a ongoing investigation being run by the special counsel.
And in a normal circumstance like that, would you expect there to be notes in any other case?
It is our normal practice to memorialize interviews.
And do so by notes?
Well, it usually gets reflected in an FBI, what's called an FBI 302, how agents go from the process of the spoken conversation to the 302 varies. And then there are other settings where it's a different kind of format.
But when agents set someone down for that kind of interview, notes would be normal. In most cases, would there also be an audio tape recorded?
Actually, I think an audio tape would be unusual.
Or a videotape would fit that same category.
Likewise, also unusual.
Thank you. And but you don't know whether they are available for General Flynn. I bring this up because of the interview of Hillary Clinton, and when we interviewed some of the members of the former administration that were familiar with the interview, the matter, we'll use their word in the, let's call it now, the investigation of Hillary Clinton, and we learned here in this room that there were no notes available to us, that there were no audio audio and no video available to us, and in fact, they had not been made available to the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, and neither had they been made available or at least reviewed by former Director Comey. And it was curious to me that a heavy decision of one of the highest investigations in the history of this country, the people that made the decision on it didn't review the materials. They just simply received the briefing of the people that they had appointed to do the investigation. I guess I'll ask you, you're going to tell me you don't have an opinion on that. Would you conduct the similar investigations in a similar manner? Wouldn't that send off an alarm bell to you if that were going on within your department today?
Well, I think what I would say is that I think investigations are best conducted by taking appropriate memorialization of an interview. What I will also say is that in the particular investigation, I think your question goes to whether or not the handling of the investigation was skewed or tainted in some way by improper political considerations. And I think that's what the outside Inspector General is looking at, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he finds.
And I believe that the question has already been asked about the principals that were in the room during that investigation, and one is counsel, and at the same time being a subject of the investigation. I'll pass that along and put some more information out here before this committee. In October of 2015, President Obama referenced the lack of intent on the part of Hillary Clinton that she wouldn't jeopardize national security or never intend to do so. That was October 2015. April of 2016, and he made a similar statement.
While other livestock owners...
Stacey, well, the couple is accused of throwing two cats like this one here out of their car and killing them. That was part of their sentence. This little guy's having fun, but now as part of their sentence, the couple is going to have to come right here.
While other livestock owners... No! Get it out!
At the show,
Wait, yes, he is. He's bleeding.
At the show,
And Grand Rapids celebrating their new title as Beer City, USA in a very appropriate fashion later today. I'm Nicole DiDonato, live in Easttown, and those details coming up. Oh my goodness. That's the way to start a Thursday, Nicole. And Grand Rapids celebrating their new title as Beer City, USA in a very appropriate fashion later today. I'm Nicole DiDonato, live in Easttown, and those details coming up.
We got a wildcat on our hands.
Oh my goodness.
Go down, bud.
That's the way to start a Thursday, Nicole.
You're very lucky. I get a catch ball. I'm going to get a catch ball. We got a wildcat on our hands. Get down, bud. Yeah, I'm not going to grab it. I get a catch ball. Somebody get a catch ball. Just sit over. Yeah, because I'm not going to grab it. You got him back? Dude. I can start up in there. Disconnect it from the day. You got him back?
immediately performs his own stunt. A death roll.
He won't stop. What do I do? Can you grab it? Throw something at him? Thank you. I can't throw my camera at him. It's true.
I don't know if he would bite me or what he would do.
It's so true. No!
But thank God for that nail trap.
What do we do? Can you grab it? Throw something at him? I can't throw my camera at him.
I don't know if he would bite me or what he would do.
Probably trapped in the car.
But thank God for that nail trap.
Probably trapped in the car. Oh my God.
Watch out, watch out! Watch out, watch out!
50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
Our so-called leaders prostituted us to the West. Destroyed our culture.
Heavy fighting continued throughout the night as U.S. Marines continued to push towards the capital city in pursuit of Khaled al-Assad. Sporadic fighting can be heard as the bulk of al-Assad.
Jackson, get your ass on the line now! We got hostiles moving in from the north!
Bravo 6, we're clear of the bar. Thanks for the assist.